Today, let's talk about one of the biggest economic stories of our time, the US-China trade war. Now, this is a conflict that isn't fought with soldiers, but with tariffs, taxes that have completely reshaped global trade and impacted everything from farming to the smartphone in your pocket. So let's get right into it. 145%. And no, that is not a typo. At the height of the renewed trade conflict, that was the US tariff on some goods coming from China. I mean, a number that high isn't really a tax, it's more like a giant wall, and it sent absolute shockwaves through the global markets. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? Okay, so before we jump into the timeline and the play by play, we need to make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is a trade war, anyway? At its heart, a trade war is basically a tit for tat economic fight. One country slaps on tariffs, which are just taxes on imports, to punish what it sees as unfairness. And then, you guessed it, the other country almost always hits back with tariffs of its own. It's this escalating cycle that's really rooted in a policy called protectionism. And this really gets to the core of the whole debate. On one side, you have people arguing that protectionism is like a shield for a country's own industries. It can encourage people to buy local and, at least in theory, create jobs at home. But, and this is a big but, there's a serious flip side. Critics will tell you it makes everyday stuff more expensive, it gives you fewer choices as a consumer, and it can actually drag down the entire economy. It is a huge, high stakes gamble. So, with that background, let's look at how this US China conflict actually went down. And let me tell you, this was not a slow burn. It was a wildfire, a series of rapid fire moves that escalated incredibly quickly. The whole thing really ignited in early 2018. The Trump administration had been signaling for a while that it wanted to challenge China's trade practices, and then it made its move. This wasn't just talk anymore, this was policy, and it triggered an immediate and very forceful response from Beijing. And the escalation was just dizzying to watch. It started in January with tariffs on solar panels. By March, it was global tariffs on steel and aluminum. China didn't wait around. In April, they hit back, targeting key American exports like pork and soybeans. By the time summer rolled around, both sides were slapping tariffs on tens of billions of dollars worth of goods. And then in September, the US targeted a massive $200 billion more. This was a trade war on fast forward. Now you have to remember, this wasn't some abstract economic game being played. It was hitting real people on the ground and hitting them hard. For American farmers who depended on the Chinese market, the retaliation was devastating. As the head of the American Soybean Association put it at the time, this was a scorched earth approach. There was an attempt to kind of cool things down. In January 2020, this Phase 1 deal was signed. A big part of it was China promising to buy a lot more US goods. But it didn't really pan out. A major study from the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that China only bought about 58% of what it promised, leading them to call the deal, pretty bluntly, a failure. So, all these policies, they sent shockwaves that went far beyond government offices. Let's really break down the tangible costs and the real-world consequences of this economic conflict. What was the human cost here? Well, according to a 2021 study by Oxford Economics, the trade war resulted in a net loss of 245,000 American jobs. The theory was supposed to be that tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back, but this study found that the disruption and the retaliatory tariffs actually did the opposite. And for the agricultural sector, oh man, the financial blow was just staggering. Soybean farmers alone saw an estimated $24 billion in exports just vanish. For an industry where trade can make or break you, this was absolutely catastrophic. And you can really see the pain for farmers when you just look at the numbers. In 2017, China bought nearly two-thirds of all US soybean exports. Just 1 year later, that plummeted to only 18%. 18. Even after that Phase 1 deal, the market never quite got back to where it was. It was just a massive, destabilizing shock to an entire industry. And it wasn't just soybeans, not by a long shot. I mean, take cranberries. The price for a barrel dropped 62% in just 2 years. From pork to hay to ethanol, American farmers all across the country felt the squeeze as one of their biggest customers basically slammed the door shut. And beyond the farms, those ripple effects just kept spreading. The constant uncertainty made manufacturers nervous, so they delayed investments. Studies found that it was actually US consumers, regular people. who ended up paying for most of the tariffs through higher prices. All of this turmoil started sparking very real fears of a global recession. So, just when it seemed like the world was sort of adjusting to this new chaotic reality, the conflict entered another, even more intense phase. In 2025, the tariff playbook was completely rewritten, and that led to an unprecedented escalation. This chart really tells a dramatic story. For years, the average US tariff rate was low, hanging out around 2.5%. Then, in just a matter of months in 2025, it skyrocketed to 27%. To put that into perspective, that's the highest average tariff level the US had seen in over a century, since the infamous Smoot-Hawley Act that helped make the Great Depression worse. And it's pretty clear that the strategy became way more complex. You had Section 232 tariffs being used for national security. There was a new reciprocal tariff that aimed to match whatever rates other countries were charging. They even introduced secondary tariffs, which was a new weapon to punish other countries for trading with a target. And closing the de minimis loophole, that was a direct shot at Chinese e-commerce, ending the tax-free status for all those small shipments. The reaction to all these new policies was immediate, and it was severe. Just the announcement of that reciprocal tariff sent a shockwave through the entire global financial system. It actually caused the NASDAQ to have its worst single day point drop in its entire history, as investors just completely panicked. And all of this brings us to the fundamental question, right? After years of escalating tariffs, of market shocks, of fracturing supply chains, have the rules of global trade just been broken for good? Are we shifting away from an era of free trade and entering a new normal of permanent economic conflict? The answer, whatever it is going to shape our world for decades to come.